Hey everyone, welcome back to the Polyglot Developer Twitch channel. So with us today we have Chris Mitchell. So he's going to be kind of our star of the day when it comes to teaching us how to use AWS API Gateway. But just for logistical reasons first, so we're still very new to the streaming thing. So expect that there could be some kind of issues with the audio, the video. If at any point in time you do notice something going wrong, just drop something in the chat. So the chat will show up on the screen. I'll have access to it. I'll be also sending stuff off to Chris as we progress. I notice that the chat is a little broken right now. I'm going to fix it as Chris starts talking. But don't worry about that too much. We did have to reschedule this session a few times. I did have a baby a few days ago. So all is good on that end. But Chris, you wanna take us through what you plan to show us today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick. Congrats on the baby too, by the way. Good job rescheduling. I didn't want you to have to do this from the emergency room
Yeah.
or delivery room even. So it's all good. We can dive in now.
Yeah, no problem. And while you do that, like I said, I'm going to be fixing this chat because it seems to have gotten a little botched somewhere along the way.
Cool. So I just figured we could go through some AWS API Gateway. I've got it up here on the screen now. I'm just logged in, looking at my API gateways here.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff we could go over with API Gateway. It's basically Amazon's, gateway to every service that they have. You can access through API Gateway. So I've had a lot of fun over the last like 2 years or so, really trying to integrate this with all of our services that we use where I work at. And so basically all of our traffic flows through API Gateway to access AWS services, Lambda, DynamoDB, SQS, SNS, all the different services. So I figured today we just might as well go in and create a new API, see what we can come up with. I can start simple, just do a simple GET request, maybe access a Lambda function. We can go from there.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And don't feel obligation to say where you work if it's not appropriate.
Oh no, yeah, no, that's great. I actually work for E&J Gallo Winery, so I'm a senior developer there. Senior programmer analyst is the technical term. So they're a really cutting edge for being a winery. They're actually 75 plus years old, but they're really on top of things, and I've really been grateful to work there as far as their technology stack. They've really been open to allow me to play with API Gateway and all this other kind of stuff. So if anyone's ever interested, check them out for developer positions as well.
Awesome. Just the chat was fixed, so we're good now.
Cool. So so I got the API Gateway here up and running. This is just I guess I can start from the beginning here. Just log into AWS. If you just visit aws.amazon.com, sign into the console. And as you can see up here with my tabs, what I like to do is when you're using any Amazon services, starting with API Gateway, pretty much you have to hit, I'm going to have to set some permissions with IAM. I'm going to have to hit CloudWatch to watch some logs.
Yep.
I'm going to create a Lambda function. So I pretty much open a tab for every one of those and just kind of switch across to all of them. And so I'll hit the API Gateway tab here and get started.
Can you zoom in just a bit on your browser?
Yep.
You should be able to hit the Command plus key and it'll do it for you.
A little better?
Yep. Oh yeah, looks great.
Get your face out of my way now. There we go. And so you can see here I've got a few of my own API gateways set up here that I've already created, some for test, some for preparing for today. I have a RetroPie that I play around with a lot. So I've been creating some WebSocket endpoints for that to kind of stream data from my RetroPie up to AWS. So it's kind of some of the fun things you can do with it. A note here, I have all of these API gateways running, plus I don't even know how many Lambda functions I have. If I switch over here to the Lambda screen, a couple of pages worth. Last month, for example, my AWS bill was 50 cents. So as long as you create these things, destroy them on demand, and don't hammer them,
Yeah.
All the stuff that we're going to do today is going to be free for your account. So if you follow along and do anything here, even leaving it open and just don't advertise that you have anything open to the world,
Yeah.
and you'll be fine.
So for your 50 cents bill, what exactly were you doing?
Oh, the traffic to my blog that I get
Oh, all right.
is the bill. So my blog at blog.chrismitchellonline.com lives in an S3 bucket. And using CloudFront to host it, that's the 50-cent bill. I think one time I had a $5 bill because I forgot to turn off an EC2 server overnight. So that was really when I decided that you have to go serverless all the way anyways. So
Yeah.
So Nick, have you ever messed around with any of the API Gateway or any of these kind of
I probably have
like
done the very bare minimum. So that would be just converting a Lambda function into a very simple API endpoint, but that's without any
okay.
kind of auth. That's without anything special.
Oh, great. This is going to be perfect then. I think that's kind of the route I wanted to
Yeah.
go down. Just create a simple API. So we can go ahead and do that right now.
Sweet.
So there's right off the bat, you get a choice of all these different APIs that you can create. When I first started doing this, there was only a REST API endpoint option. So now they've kind of opened it up to all these different types. You have an HTTP API, which is a simple like integration with Lambda. You have WebSockets. I've been playing with WebSockets, and it is quite complicated. It's not as easy as just opening up a REST endpoint and then replying with data because you have to do the connections and whatnot.
Yeah.
I'd really love to get into that. So maybe I'm thinking for part two, if we can, if we wanted to keep doing this, we could do WebSockets like just on its own.
Yeah. So do you actually have a functional project though? Did you ever get it working?
REST, our WebSocket,
Yeah.
I got the connection done. It
Got
took
it.
me about 4 hours just for really digging in and whatnot. And I did. I got an open connection so then I could talk back and forth to the server. But I couldn't figure out how to pipe that into any kind of functional like usage, like Lambda. So I was talking with the server, but it wasn't going anywhere basically. So I did get a connection going. That was like for me, that was like half the battle. Like, what is a WebSocket connection? So I
Yeah.
was able to do that, and I can definitely demonstrate that one of these days if we
Sure.
get there.
Yeah, you got a comment from Crutchcorn saying that 4 hours to get a WebSockets working is pretty much a miracle.
Oh, cool. I'm glad. I thought I was way behind the curve. I was like, why is this so complicated? Cool. And then there's a couple of other ones down here. The REST API private, this is for when you want to do internal, like server to server in your own VPC AWS account
Yeah.
stuff. But we're going to definitely open it up to our world. So I'm just going to create a general REST API one today. I wanted to mention there's these two HTTP API and REST API.
Sure.
And basically the difference between those two is this HTTP one out the door is a lot simpler, but I found it kind of limiting. I've been using the REST API one for a long time now, so I've kind of got the ins and outs of it, so it's not as hard. But on your first go around, if you wanted to just try to get a Lambda or an HTTP backend one, this one is kind of simpler. You just kind of follow a WYSIWYG editor. But I figure for today, we'll dig in a little bit deeper and do things like auth and cores and like
Yeah.
management like that. A little bit more of a bigger API.
So I mean, just looking at the descriptions, it looks like they do like the same things. It's just a different
This
way
is
to
the
do
big
it.
one. The big one right here is AWS Services.
Ah.
That's the one that this one doesn't support. And so when it says AWS Services, that's another fun one too, where you can actually connect your API gateway to, say, S3 directly, or DynamoDB, or SNS. So in the past, I was used to writing a Lambda function that would write out a SNS notification, like an email
Sure.
or a text message. But now with AWS services that they've introduced now, you can actually format the request from API Gateway and send it directly to the AWS service without Lambda even being involved. It's pretty nifty. It takes a little bit more of a bootstrap to get it going, but it's definitely worth it because then you don't have to manage Lambda functions. You can have your applications directly deal with whatever AWS service you'd like to work with.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to build one of those guys right now. Getting started screen is pretty simple. We're just going to kind of fill out some basics here. I do want a REST API. I'm going to have a new API. A couple of other options here. You can actually clone or import from Swagger or OpenAI API 3. At work, we're really looking at this one right now because we have other teams that are actually working with API Gateway. So with this option, we can import using Swagger options so we can share our APIs. I haven't got that far yet, so today I'm just going to go with a simple new API. I like to prefix everything with CMO because that's Chris Mitchell Online, and we'll just do API Gateway 2. Well, the gateways, that's an optional thing. And then regional, you can do edge optimized and private, which is that VPC private only link.
Sure.
And then regional is the default. So we'll just basically open it up to the world. Create API. And you get a whole big screen of nothing. Ready to go.
I just want to reiterate to the many people who are popping up in the chat here that we are live. So if you have a question for Chris, please stop us and we'll answer that.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. And as we go along too, I just want to mention that I'm probably going to botch this up like a lot. So I might even hit Google. I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot of things you can do with API Gateway, which makes it fun and challenging at the same time. I did go down the route of a little bit more complicated API. You could do that HTTP one, and it'll be a quicker, simpler one. But I wanted to do a full demonstration. So once you have your gateway open here, the first thing that we basically want to do is we want to create. You can create resources and methods. So resources are your endpoints,
yep.
And then methods are obviously your HTTP methods.
So like post and put and patch and things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So your methods would be post, patch, all that different kind of stuff.
Why would they separate it into two different drop-down actions, right, like that, do you think?
Because you can actually create, so I can back up here. If we have, so I have the slash right here. So my root endpoint,
yeah,
I can actually add a method right on root called post. So then I can post to the root and be able to handle the post just directly against my API. Like I wouldn't have any namespacing, any slash, endpoints.
Sure.
Or I can grab up here the slash again and go actions, create resource. And then now I can have like what I try to do with my APIs is group them into like services. So for example, today I was really expecting to build an S3 API gateway endpoint. So all my applications would eventually need to say talk to S3. So why don't we create like an S3 endpoint, so slash S3.
Sure.
You can namespace it like that. There's a couple of different ways you could do it. You could create a new endpoint and just have it be, you figure this API is called S3, or I can do it like this and I'll have S3 be like a namespace inside this API. I'm gonna kill this post right here so we don't get confused. So now I have this S3 method. So I have I have the S3 resource. Now I want to add a method to here. So we're just going to do a simple get request on it.
And just out of curiosity, this API that we're working with, is it publicly accessible? Like if somebody hit this CMO API Gateway 2 dot, I assume Amazon or something, would they be able to interact with this API that we're creating?
Yeah. Right now at this minute, no,
Sure.
because we have to deploy it.
Yeah.
But yes, after I deploy it, it will be accessible. By default, they are open. And then we'll just throw an API key in front of it too to make sure that it's not open.
Got it.
I think that's usually best practice. And then I can show you too what's really cool with the API keys over here. You have usage plans and API keys. So whenever you apply a key to an API, you get a usage plan on top of it. So I can say, NRA boy API key gets 5 hits per month.
NRA boy? Come on now.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's really, so you can do lots of little adjustments on it. And I think it's a per resource level too. So I can say my S3 endpoint can have unlimited, but if I wanted to do an S3 post, that post would only allow for 10 a month or something. So however granular you want to get with your usage plans and API keys, it's really helpful.
Yeah.
So I have my get method here. And then also what I want to do is there's this nice little button called enable cores, because I don't know if you've tried to set up cores before, just in any kind of application. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So Amazon allows you to do it just out of the box here. So if you hit enable cores, it gives you some default, like we're going to allow any origin. We're going to allow some basic headers, and we're going to allow get and options for our basic methods for now. If you wanted to add post and whatnot, you can add those later. when you create it here, it'll give you a little warning. It's going to replace all of the existing cores with new basic ones. So we did that.
What's with all the fails?
Yeah, we got a lot of errors. Oh, you know why? It's because I don't have anything set up yet. My GET request is empty. So it tried to create cores on the GET request, but there's nothing there. We should try that again. Let me set this up here. So when I go to GET now, it wants to do the GET setup. So what kind of integration do we want to use? This is where you select that AWS Services if you wanted it.
Yeah.
For today, we'll just do a regular Lambda function. There's this one right here is kind of interesting. You can do a proxy integration.
Sure.
So we'll just say AWS API Gateway, just proxy all my requests right to Lambda, and then the reverse as well. I've had some success with that, and I've also had a lot of pull my hair out moments with it, because it doesn't always work like you think it does. And so if you uncheck it, you get more control over it, but we are going to have to set up both the request and the response. So I think it's probably best for demonstration purposes, we'll just set it all up here. So I need to just point it at my Lambda function that I did. So API Gateway. By the way, I could pop over here real quick too and show everyone this. I pre-set up a Lambda function because I figured we were going to do API Gateway stuff today. So I kind of built this Lambda function right here.
Walk us through what it does real quick.
Yep. So what this Lambda function does is it gets a file from S3 and it also writes a file from S3. I cheated on the write a file because I didn't write all the code for it. So it just actually says request a file and it'll return 200 OK. This function is probably overcomplicated for what I have. I should probably build it more simple, but just as an example, it's really what it does. It's just get a file from S3 and write in file to S3. And there's these, let's spread this out a little bit. Can you guys see the code okay on there?
I can, but maybe just zoom in once more, just in case. I usually try to keep my browsers at maybe 150%.
Yeah, what is this right here?
But did it just zoom in separately from the browser?
Yeah, it looks like it does. That's kind of nice.
All right, yeah, it's pretty clear. If somebody in the chat thinks otherwise, just let us know and we'll zoom in or zoom out.
Gotcha. So just as a quick overview, you know what we can do? We can switch back and forth between like API Gateway and Lambda as we kind of implement these things. So I guess just as an overview, the goal of my API today would be to read and write from an S3 file. So I kind of just pre-wrote that Lambda function to start with.
Yeah.
And if you think about a microarchitecture world, there's been a lot of, we bang our heads at work about it all the time. Do you do one Lambda function per action, or do you group a lot of actions into one Lambda function and run them like based on queries?
So like a dispatcher?
Like it did, exactly, yeah. And so we go down the dispatcher route. That's a great way to do it. So instead of writing a Lambda function that says write to S3 and then another Lambda function that says get file from S3, we group them into one Lambda function here, and we have this this event.action right here, and that is kind of like the path or the dispatch that you would look for. So through API Gateway, I'll show you how to attach special parameters to your event object, so you can figure out which event you're basically calling.
Yeah, I actually didn't know you can do that. I thought I was under the impression that you had to do one function per one endpoint. I didn't know that you could dispatch them with Lambda.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we cheat or do we bend the rules, or should we be doing it like this, right? We always kind of go.
Yeah.
But then also too, we've also gotten in trouble with. I definitely have 1,500 line Lambda functions that are a pain in my butt. But somebody just decided to throw everything in there. So you got to be careful. Still try to keep the microarchitecture in mind.
Well, it's a good example because I won't mention the name, otherwise it's going to fire behind me. But my Smart Assistant, when I make a Smart Assistant skill, I usually do create a dispatcher in a Lambda function. But it's a little different from an actual API with endpoints.
I guess it's kind of the same concept, right? Like your special assistant back there is going to fire off events to Lambda, in, I would imagine, the exact same way that API Gateway does. That's the way AWS works between its services. So the incoming data that your service is sending is going to be almost the same, if not exactly the same, from API Gateway as all the other services. So by attaching, so we can use API Gateway to modify our events in Lambda to figure out which like event we're going to do.
Yeah, we're getting a comment in the chat. I followed up for more information, but this person is slightly lost on the JavaScript code. If we can pinpoint on exactly where, then I will bring it up again, and maybe you can go over it. But until then, I'd say continue as normal.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it is a little bit of just kind of throwing together JavaScript here. It's not really the best part. It's really this if event.action equals get file.
Yeah. And event event is actually passed in from Lambda itself. It's not something that you're just magically creating.
No, it's so every Lambda event will give you this, every Lambda function will give you this exports.handler as an async event with an event and a context. Async function with an event and context. And so this event right here is what comes from API Gateway. So we can modify that event before it gets to Lambda.
Yeah.
And so by adding an action here, I can add an action called get file, and that will only do this part right here in my JavaScript code. So it was a great example. We can get started on that. We can head back to our, let me grab the name of this function right here, just to be sure. Yep, CMO Gateway. Default timeout is fine. API Gateway has a hard 30-second timeout. So just so everyone knows.
That's a huge timeout. I'd be skeptical to any application that took that long to time out, right?
But yeah, it's great. People I see in the in the forums and whatnot, can you please extend it or whatever? I'm like, if you have to go through API Gateway and you're taking more than 30 seconds, then we got to figure something else out.
Yeah, especially not in today's world.
Here, if you wanted to set it to whatever milliseconds, but we'll just go with the 30. So Lambda, cool. So we'll have our. Okay, this is so it's gonna add permissions. Permissions are so they're rough. I could probably even do a whole nother screencast about them, and I would hate it because they're fun. So luckily enough for Lambda functions, API Gateway will under the hood write all the permissions it needs to invoke the Lambda function.
Sure.
And then in turn, Lambda has its own permissions, so we have to do the permission chain here. I was hoping that if we run into errors, we'll have to dig into there. But out of the box, hopefully we shouldn't, just with a GET request. So then now, once we hit up that the integration request here, it creates this little chain. It's kind of fun to follow. It goes from the request to the method to the integration. Over here, you get this nice sideways thing of where it's actually heading, and then you're going to come back with the response. And then, so what the integration response says, and then what the method response says, and then back to your client. In a nutshell, what that means is you can modify what goes in and you can modify what goes out, all through API Gateway. So it's great for things like if somebody doesn't pass in a username when you're checking a password, username and password, you can just kick it out at the API level and say, bad request, instead of going all the way to Lambda, that kind of thing. So essentially, now that this is created here, there's a little test button here. We can see if this even works. Just with no query strings, no headers, no variables. Just hit test and see how we go. And the response body said null. So it was status 200, which is good. The response body returned nothing because that Lambda function didn't have a default path, I guess you could say, or a dispatcher. If we set up a simple Lambda function that just said hello world and responded, that's what would be right here. But because I tried to make it complicated.
So they included testing functionality without actually having to type that endpoint into your browser then.
Yep. So we haven't even got to the browser yet, which is really kind of nice.
So I think a lot has changed since I last looked at API Gateway then, because a lot of this either didn't exist or I didn't know how to use it.
Oh, I think over the last 2 years or so, because I've been using it for about 2 years now.
Yeah.
Over the last 2 years, it's completely exploded. Like all of this stuff. You're right. I don't even know if there was a test suite 2 years ago. You used to have to deploy and then test it, I think. So yeah, this is pretty cool here. And you can. This is where you can do all your query strings, your headers. To me, it essentially mimics Postman. So if I wanted to do a Postman request to my endpoint, this is kind of the similar thing, and you get a response here. So speaking of the response, we're getting null because we didn't tell our Lambda function here again. We didn't give it an action. So event action of get file or event action, I think I set two of them up. Write file. So it didn't see either one of these. So it actually didn't return anything right here. We can just return a simple string to make it look like. Save that. So if I go back to API Gateway and then test it. There we go. So now it sent out the, you didn't pass and something. Oh, action. That's funny. So there's your simple, just the Lambda response without any actions would do there. Typically in my code, I think I'd probably throw an error right there. You didn't pass an action, so you don't know what you're doing. Please don't try to call my API like that.
Yeah.
So now let's look at how we can actually pass those actions in. So if we go back to our get method execution up here, back to this chain here, we're going to go to the integration request. And down here, kind of hidden, is this mapping templates. Oops. Mapping templates are super powerful. So this is where we can take our incoming like raw HTTP data and we can map it using API Gateway, this special code in here, to send stuff to our Lambda function that our Lambda functions expect, as opposed to trying to parse it all through Lambda, not getting the right variables, et cetera. We can do it all through these templates. So there's these three options right here. It wants to know what kind of content type you're sending. So typically in a REST world, we're going to send application JSON. And so that's what we'll add here. And then there's this recommended one right here. When no templates are defined, just use the content type that I'm going to say here. This is where you can, if you get really finicky and say like you don't want users to send in more data than is what is expected, which is probably a better security practice if you get really down fine comb to it.
Yeah.
You could hit this never checkbox right here, and if your template didn't match exactly what they would send in, an API Gateway would throw an error right off the bat and say, no, you can't even go any further. For testing reasons, I usually like to open it up to just this one. So when nothing is defined, we'll just go with application JSON. So that's what we'll type in right here. Application/JSON. And then that gives us our template right here. And so this right here might be one of the hardest parts of learning API Gateway. It's using a language called Velocity. I think it's called Apache Velocity.
I've never heard of that before.
I had never heard of it before I used this. And so at first I was a little reluctant. Like, I don't know if I want to introduce a new technology stack, a new template language. But in the end, it's really the only way you can do it like this.
Sure.
And it's really powerful. So I'm going to kind of cheat here. Let me grab the one that I wrote earlier, just for the syntax, because it's like a JavaScript syntax with its own little nuances. So I created this API Gateway earlier. Oops, wrong one.
Do you think this special velocity language offers any true benefit over something that already exists that's more popular?
Good question for AWS. I'm not sure why they picked this one. I think it might be the way that so when you see the syntax here, I think it might be how it parses it.
Sure.
Was already defined using Velocity, and so that's why AWS went with that. But I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I've never seen it, so I can't judge yet. But I'm wondering if it's something like Handlebars in a sense, or something more like YAML, or
exactly like Handlebars. Here we go here. So this is an example here. I'm gonna just copy and paste this, honestly. But it's it's JSON, but you get this little input right here, this $ input.
Yeah.
And there's about 3 or 4 different keyword, like you get stage variables. Here's another one. You get input, and you get a couple of other ones.
Yeah. So then it's not a terribly complex situation then.
It can be. Yeah, it can be. Yeah, like you can do loops with it. You can do filtering. I just basically use it like you see right here, almost like a YAML, like JSON, just a quick input thing right here. Um, but yeah, I've seen it to where I've seen these things like 100 lines long where you can do loops and you can parse JSON, because the goal of this really is we're trying to take the crazy world of input of the web or whatever people are hitting with our API. We're trying to sanitize it and clean it and pass it to Lambda as efficiently as we can. So then when Lambda gets it, we don't waste compute cycles on trying to figure out what came through.
So then are we able to add validators to this template as well? Like, so that way it rejects them before even hitting the function?
In a sense, yes. I don't know how to do it off the top of my head, but I
Sure.
believe so. It's either here or in another kind of same similar velocity template that you can do in another
Yeah.
place. So I'll show you in a minute. But I think so. Yeah. Like if it's not a string, kick it out.
Yeah. Or it has to have these
Yeah,
fields or
I'm almost positive that's what this never does right here.
sure.
If it doesn't have file, just kick it out altogether. So then I don't have to check for it in my Lambda function. We can assume it's coming from API Gateway and that it's safe. So I'm just going to grab my pre-written stuff right there, paste it in here. If you're really good, I imagine you could probably figure out how to write that stuff pretty quick.
Sure.
So the first one that I use right here is this action equals get file. There's a couple of other ones that I have in here. This is where you accept input from the users as well. So in this case, I want to attach to this JSON object right here is what gets passed to my event in Lambda. So I'll be able to see anything that I type in right here as my event object in Lambda. So this is where I can pass any params, either accepted from the user or that I attach on as it flows through API Gateway. For example, the action, like I'm hard coding the action in here as get file, and that means that you can't do it when you hit my API Gateway. If you hit this endpoint, you're going to get the action get file no matter what you pass.
Sure.
But then on this other example here, file, I'm doing input.params of whatever you pass me as file. So I'm accepting a parameter from you called file.
What happens if you wanted to pass two files? Is that a possibility?
I think there's a input.json you can do, and then you can pass in an array.
Got it.
Or you could even do like file 1, file 2, however you want to do it like that.
But file, action, lambda, qualifier, those are all reserved words?
No, those are things that I typed in. So I could type in whatever I wanted to get them to flow to access them in Lambda. Whatever is right here, not reserved words at all. I just type those in. So yeah, I guess we can save that guy here.
And just to confirm that object right there is AWS Velocity, or you said it was Apache Velocity, right?
I think it's Apache Velocity, right? I think it's an open source project from Apache that Amazon has adopted for this template language here.
Sure.
Yeah, just a quick note here. You can actually save these as models. So if I had one that I wanted to reuse across different endpoints or whatnot,
Yeah.
we don't have to get that granular, but you can. So if I had this that I wanted to reuse across different API Gateway endpoints, you can save it as a model and then reuse it over and over again. That might have been a better example instead of copying and pasting from another API. But this works. So if we save that, same thing back. So now we can go back here and we can test it again. And we can say here, so query strings, this would be where you pass in, it already has it preset because I did it earlier, file equals test.text. And so now it's going to, in Lambda, my event will have a file, the event.file will equal test.text. So we can test that. And now instead of just returning the basic one, because I had action equals get file, it executed the get file code, which is this update. That's what's actually in the S3.
Is it simulating a file right there called test.txt, or is it a string?
That's an actual S3 object or actual S3 txt. Let's check it out. Let's see. So S3.
Because you never actually uploaded anything.
I had it sitting there before.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry to cut corners there.
It's all
So
good.
my S3 bucket, so I have a bucket called CMO API Gateway, and I uploaded a file called test.txt. And what stinks about S3 is I can't actually open it. Can I? Oh, I can click. I can. It'll open it here. No, it won't. It's access denied because of.
I'm just gonna say you keeping all your passwords in that file.
Yeah, exactly. This actually is a good demonstration of why it's good to go through Lambda and API
Yeah.
Gateway to access your S3 stuff, because now I don't have to open my S3 bucket to the world. I can limit it to only the API Gateway. And if you tried to access that test.txt file, you get access denied.
Well, with S3, I don't think you have to update. I don't think you have to make your whole bucket available to the world. It's on a per file basis, right?
Let's see.
Because, for example, I host my podcast on S3, and it always asks me every time I upload a file, do I want to make this public read or
Public, right?
private?
Right. I think your bucket has to have
We're
the
getting a message
permissions on it.
from Crutchcorn saying that he thinks that it's a per file basis as well. But maybe
Awesome.
you've got a special setup where you can actually do this on like a global level.
Hmm. No, you guys are right. It's this public access right here. So on the actual test.txt,
Yeah,
I can select everyone for public access. You're
got
right.
it.
It's on a per, or I can go back to the folder and I get the same thing. So now you can do more permissions on the folder. You can go all the way down to the specific file you can open up to the world as well. That's right. So I guess in my case, I didn't want to open my passwords.txt to everybody in the world. So the only way to get to that is through my API gateway.
We don't need nightmares about how terrible your passwords are.
Yeah. Hello. Let me in. Yeah. ABC 1 2 3. That's usually.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. So back in API gateway, this text right here, using the magic of that pre-written Lambda function, is what is in that action, the S3 file. So by passing in the action as get file, and then this right here as the file that I want to load, it loaded that file right from S3. Cool. Let me see. What's next? I think now we should probably open up this to the world, and let's go outside of this cool little test thing right here. So the way that API Gateway now like exposes all of these resources here, they're called stages. So if you clicked on the stage over here, I have no stages right now, so you can't see anything. So what we have to do first is if you go up here to actions and then deploy API. So it's good to note, like when you're working in here, when I'm doing all of this, it's all in my sandbox right now.
Yeah.
None of the outside world can see any of my changes until I save and publish. So publishing meaning deploy API. So if I click on this deploy API right here, and it is a per API level, not a resource level. So unfortunately, I can't just deploy S3. If I had, say, 10, 20, 100 other endpoints in here, they're all going to go. So if I do deploy API, and then we want a stage. So because I don't have any stages right now, we need to do a new stage. And I always equate a stage to an environment. So like this could be prod. We can just deploy directly to prod. So, and then you can tell it what you're doing on a deployment description level.
Yeah.
So every time I deploy, I always like to give it like I added a new S3 endpoint. Because then otherwise you get a bunch of deployments that don't make sense. So we'll deploy that out. So now so API Gateway took all of my resources, put them in a prod stage, and now here's my magic URL that it created for me.
There
So
we go.
this is,
I'm sure somebody in the chat will go attack
yeah,
that, right?
everybody hit it. I'm gonna throttle this down to 1 or maybe 10
Oh, there you go.
requests
I didn't know you could do that either.
right off the bat. Yeah. So I can so default method throttling. So I can set it at 10.
Is that 10
and then
requests
save.
per IP or 10 requests per total, or?
I'm not sure. I think 10 total. So 10 requests per second, I imagine is a pretty good API limit, right? I can even set it up to 100. Not really worried about it
10
too
is probably
much.
good for most people.
Yeah, 10 requests a second is probably, you're right, it's pretty good. And then there's this burst. AWS has this burst credits kind of options. You'll see it in there a lot of their services. So I think what happens with this is when I get above, I haven't tested it like to the T, but say I hit that 100 requests per second, it'll burn one of the burst credits to allow more than that until I run out of burst credits, and then it'll just throttle it 100%.
Sure. People are saying that the real DDoS protection is the fact that your URL is too crazy to type.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and I'll hide it right here, right? Just don't show anybody up there. Yeah, you can do custom domain names with
Yeah.
AWS with the API Gateway, but I've never hooked them up. We just use these pre-built ones. Usually, I just set them in a parameter somewhere and forget about it. They are. It is interesting how it does it. So it's going to do slash. You'll see the stage right here /prod.
Yep.
And so if I create another stage. So maybe I want like a acceptance testing, so ACC.
Wait, slow down. There was a scenario where you would want two staging environments?
Sure. So what if I want to deploy my API to stage so I can have everybody test it first
Yeah.
before I push it to prod? So if I create a new stage and then select the whatever deployment, I only have one deployment here, so this is the latest one.
Sure.
And then there's that nice description that I gave it. So if I create that, now I'll have another stage over here for ACC and prod, and now the endpoint changes.
Got it.
So in your application, you can have it point to ACC or prod. We definitely use this big time at work to separate out ACC and prod.
Oh, wait, maybe I misunderstood stages. So stages are not a staging kind of deployment. It's a special AWS terminology then, right?
It is an AWS terminology of a stage.
Because I was thinking you would have like a development, maybe a test, a stage, a prod, and then I'm thinking why would you have two stage environments?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So I think it would be better, and I equate it to environment. So
Yeah.
ACC. So instead of a stage, it's an environment, because a lot of people do use the terminology stage as ACC. So that could get confusing. And so now you see I have another ACC endpoint up here. So now I can hit that one instead. And I guess we can go ahead and give that a try. If you have Postman open, you can just copy that URL. Oh, you do need the resource. So it's the URL plus the resource.
I could copy that URL, except for I can't copy it through the screen share, and there's not a chance that I'm going to be. No, don't paste it in. It's all good.
Okay, there you go. Just in case you wanted to play with it, I'm going to destroy these in about 5 minutes anyway. So let me see what's. Actually, I don't even think I need because it's a GET request. I might even be able to just go hit it directly in my browser. No, it doesn't like the headers in a browser for whatever reason.
Because you're not using application JSON?
I think so, yeah. So let's try.
So yeah, crack open Postman.
Postman is to save the day. Expense, let me see. So GET request, content type. Oops, that's the wrong place. We don't want it a param, we wanted a header. And not a param. So let's see what happens here. There you go. So, I actually got a 400 bad request because I didn't send a file on it. I apologize for making that Lambda function a little bit too complicated off the bat.
Yeah.
I had the full like S3 integration endpoint right off the bat, so it does need a parameter of file and test.txt. You can see it adds it up here to the actual like GET request, and then it should return what's in that file.
Can you zoom in a little bit on Postman? I think most people are getting the idea, but never hurts to be zoomed in just a little bit.
There you go. Let me go one more.
Oh yeah, that's excessive, but good. There you go.
Cool. So I made the mistake right off. I do this all the time. So the like right off the top of my head, what I want to do is I want to go to API Gateway, right? And I want to hit my stage. And I'm like, oh, I want to hit ACC. And so I grab this URL right here. And then I copy and paste it. I go over here to Postman. I paste it in. I add my parameter of file is test.txt, and it fills it in up here. And I hit send. And I always get this stupid error, missing authentication token.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what did I do? Did I set up API keys wrong, or what's going on? So this is the generic response from API Gateway for 404 not found. It doesn't tell you that it's not found. I'm pretty sure for security reasons. So then you don't know if that file exists or not. It's just saying, hey, you don't have access to hit this at all. It's because I didn't put the resource name in there as slash. What did I call it? Slash S3.
Oh yeah, all right. I didn't even catch that.
I didn't. I do it all the time. Yeah. So if you don't, you have to have the stage, which is the first part, plus the resource path to be able to hit it, and not hit send.
Go back to the Amazon dashboard behind Postman.
Mm-hmm.
You would have thought that because it gave you that link when you had clicked on the get method, right? Where were you clicking when you saw the link? Oh, in the stages.
Oh, yeah. So the
all right.
stage and ACC, and so that's like the root.
Got it.
And then you have to know what resource you want to hit, which is basically an endpoint slash S3 or whatever. Or like what we were talking about, I think we mentioned this in the very beginning, right? You could add actions to your slash or home. And so then that's where you would do a get on just the home. Or like the root, or on the stage, I guess you should call it. If I wanted to do a get action on just the stage, I would add it right here as under the slash. So again, if we go stages, ACC, copy this guy right here, and then go into here, and then add our slash S3, and then hit send, and then and then there's the full. That's the full request from Postman all the way to Lambda S3 and then back again.
And I assume it's like that because we're not telling it to return it as JSON. Oh, it does have a JSON type. It's still escaping it.
It's escaping it. Yeah, in your application, if you do JSON .parse, it'll fix it.
Yeah.
There's reasons why it's escaped like that, and sometimes I agree with it, and sometimes I don't. A lot of times, if you see in the Lambda function, I'm doing a JSON .stringify before I send it back.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is if the file has an error response in it and you don't stringify it, API Gateway can't parse the errors correctly, and it'll send back an OK, even though Lambda crashed.
Got it.
So for API Gateway to interact with the response from Lambda, it has to be stringified.
So then maybe I don't, and you do this more than I do. Maybe in a realistic scenario, you wouldn't just return back what Lambda spits out. You would probably create your own object to return.
Right. Exactly.
All right.
We can do that here if I didn't want to. So that's a great example. So if I know that if I get this far in my code, this is the response right here. Not to dig too far into the JSON or into the JavaScript. This is the response that I get back from S3.
Yep.
If I just do that without the stringify and then save it, because I know that the response from S3 is correct at this point, I've already done my error checking and all this other kind of stuff. Then I can save that, and let's see, and then it should not be stringified. So there you go. So I just take off the stringify. That's a great point. If I want to send that back to my application, I probably don't want to stringify it, because then that adds an extra step on the consumer side of JSON.parse, and then it could fail and whatever too. So just returning application JSON is probably the right way to go. Good call.
Yep. I'm a total Lambda and API Gateway noob. I use it probably once a year.
No, it really is easy to just jump into and get started as far as a get request and whatever. I've probably made it a little overly complicated for today, just because I wanted to play with some fun stuff. But just a simple API request is pretty straightforward. I think the next thing I wanted to show, how are we doing on time, Nick?
We're good if you're good. We're at 10 minutes to the hour.
Perfect. One of the other things that I wanted to introduce was the API key. So I would have to imagine that unless we're doing an open, what's that one, that Pokemon open API endpoint
Poke
or something
API
like
or
that.
Poke API. I use
Yeah.
that for everything.
Yeah, I remember. And I recently learned that there's a Marvel one too, so that's pretty
Oh
cool.
yeah, I've seen that one too. That is good.
Yeah. So I think besides that, I think everyone out there would probably want to throw an API key on top of their endpoints. So in here on the left, we have the API keys like options.
Yeah.
So these keys are, it's kind of the way that they lay it out at first confused me because you have this API keys kind of like underneath my API, but they're actually global to your account. I do believe. So if I create an API key here, I can use it across my different APIs. So that's why you see the other ones that I've kind of created here to play with. But we will create a new API for one today. So they have a great example right here, customer name. So if I want to hand out an API key, I'm going to give it to to just me. I'm the only one that's allowed to access this.
So I have a few questions on this then maybe, since this is a new experience for me.
Yeah,
Typically, I guess when you're creating an API, you would have like your own dashboard, and they would be able to create API keys on an account basis. Can you still do that with API Gateway, or is this a very manual process that you have to do for your users?
I believe you would have to do it. You would have to write the code yourself to be able to do that. I don't know. There might be an open source project out there to do it.
Yeah.
I only know how to do it through API Gateway here. So
Yeah.
when you say create, I guess you would want to create API keys as a consumer.
Yeah.
I don't know if AWS offers that out of the box. This is the admin side, so I would distribute the keys. I know how to do it through code, so
Yeah.
I could write my own dashboard to do it. Sure, and I'm sure I bet there's an open source project out there to allow you to do that
So you think
on top of this.
do you think this is more for an internal kind of application audience rather than creating a public API?
Depends if you want to distribute public API keys or not.
Yeah.
I would say the API gateway is definitely a public API. You can do it. I just don't know if they have the methods or they just don't supply the methods
Yeah.
of you creating your own API key out of the box.
Like,
Heck, if they don't, maybe that's something we
yeah.
can hack on together because I could certainly write the code to do it with the SDKs through AWS.
Well, I guess
So
you could
I
use
would
this for just rotating keys every 6 months
absolutely.
to keep them fresh.
Yep. At my work, we use this for our internal our applications. I would distribute the keys for them. So, like we have a mobile developer that comes to me and says, "I need a new application." I would just give them a key as an admin here.
Sure.
They wouldn't have the ability to create it themselves. But that's a great question. I wonder if there is a way out there to like slap a dashboard on this for a consumer side. I bet there is. If there's not, then that's a great open source project to just get started on.
I mean, I honestly haven't used Swagger either, but maybe that's something Swagger does for you. Isn't Swagger just
Yeah,
a front end for an API kind of thing?
yeah. We're looking into using it at work for documentation. Open API 3 and Swagger. They have like a whole dashboard that you can install as a server on your side that is API Gateway, and it comes with a bunch of documentation and key generation and stuff too.
Sure.
So that might have an option in it too. Great thing to move forward with. So basically, front end key generation. Cool. So I'm going to save this key. Let's see. So when you have a key, you have to add it to a usage plan. It's pretty straightforward. Just click the add usage plan here. We'll call it about prod usage. I think I'm doing this right. Let me see. Maybe I'm doing this backwards.
If it doesn't work, we just try it again.
Yeah, that's right. So no usage plans found. I think I have to create the usage plan first and then apply it to the key. So let's try it that way. And it's all. I think this is actually a bug in AWS right here. When I get into this screen, it takes my other API links away. I have to actually go back to my API and select it again before I can continue on.
It's hard to believe
Pretty
there would
sure.
be a bug in AWS.
No way. You wouldn't imagine. Yeah, so here's our usage plan. So I have a basic one right here that I've already created. So say This is actually because you can just reuse these across your APIs. I've made this one with 100 rates per second with a burst of only 100 with 100 requests per month. So I'm thinking that that's pretty much good to go
Yeah.
already. So I've already added it to my other API that I created here. So now I can just add another stage. So if I select my API that I was working on, which was API 2, and then not all require. Oh, okay. I'll show you that one too. By default, the methods that we created, that get method, doesn't require an API key. So I have to go back and adjust the resource to get it to use the key.
Sure.
So we're going to go ACC stage, I guess, and then OK. So that wired up this usage to my ACC stage. So if I go back to my keys now, and then I have my me, I'm the only one that's going to access this one, add it to the usage plan. And then what do we call that? Shoot, I already forgot. And they really need a drop down. Oh, here we go. Basic. My basic usage plan. There you go. So as you can see, these APIs are using this and what stages are using it too. So if I go back to so now that's all wired up with my key, which is right here, hidden. I guess I'll show you guys. There it is there. I'll copy that for further reference. Now, if I go back to my resources and I select my get, and then, oh, it's back here. Under method execution, it's this chain again. So when the method request comes in, that's where you actually set the API key required. So right here, it's set to false by default. So it's telling me right now, like, hey, are you sure you want to leave it at false? Basically, I'm going to set it to true. Okay, and then the little warning goes away. So now, like I mentioned before, every change that you make, I'm just in the sandbox mode right now. So I actually have to go and deploy it again. So deploy it to, and then here's the other option, or this demonstration now. I want to just test this in ACC and don't actually want to push it to my prod stage yet. So I can just do it to ACC and we say added API key, hit deploy. And now, if I go back to Postman and I wired up everything right, I don't have that API key. I'm hitting ACC, and I should get access denied. No, it didn't work. Hang on. I know what the problem is.
Perfect.
Wait 30 seconds. What's that?
It's always good if you know the problem.
I'm pretty sure it takes about 30 seconds for the deploy to kick in. I went too fast.
Yep. For anyone who's done live content before, whether that be Twitch or an event, things never seem to go correctly. It's a stressful process.
Just slow down with your clicking, it looks like, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm getting that nice message forbidden. It's returning a cool 403 forbidden. All the correct RESTful API gateway stuff. So if we go to headers here, by default, it accepts the API key by header. I think you can send it in as a parameter as well if you change it. But by default, it just wants the X API key header.
Yeah.
And it's that one that I copy and pasted.
Oh, so it wouldn't even be a bearer token then. It'd be an API key header.
API key header, yeah. But there is the other ways of doing it. You can set it. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. There's even ways to do it through your Amazon account. Like I can create you a role in my account and you can access my stuff. That one's a little bit beyond me though. So I just like API keys.
Sure.
So if I hit that and then I hit send, then we should go through. There you go. Cool. So now I have the API key protecting that endpoint.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't take us that long. We did quite a bit in an hour.
In an hour, yeah. It's crazy how these demonstrations go.
Yeah.
There's like you could just keep going on and on, right?
I mean, the actual differences from here would be in your actual Lambda function logic, right? And less so your API gateway.
What do you mean?
I mean, we saw how to do API keys. We saw how to do methods and using Velocity. So, I mean, is there anything API gateway specific that would be left, or does this cover all the ground?
The only other one thing that is kind of a stickler for me in designing a good API is your response codes.
Yeah.
And so, like right now, if I go into my Lambda function, right, and I just do, I'm just gonna go to the very top right here. and find a try catch
Yep.
right here. And I'm just going to throw an error, right? And we'll just say Lambda's going to error out. Like we don't know what the problem is. So we're just going to simulate an error. So if I go back here, I believe what will happen is it'll say error here, but it's still going to return a response of 200 OK.
Corbin's saying, or Crutchcorn is saying, please return valid response codes.
Please return, exactly. Yeah, it's an extra step that really makes your API usable, basically. So if I just left this as is, something happened in my Lambda function, I'm going to get this back by default. Error messages, error, because that's what I threw in my try catch block. And so, but you see in Postman, it's actually returning 200 OK. So what you have to do in API Gateway, it's a little bit of it took me a little bit of trial and error. We can go down this real quick. Let me see if I can get this working. What you have to do in your resources under your get, it's this chain again. So when I come back, so I have an integration request that goes to Lambda, and when I get the response back from Lambda, I have to tell it what I'm expecting back from Lambda as far as as far as a response. There's ways to have Lambda throw response codes, or there's ways for API Gateway to trap your code your responses and distribute the codes correctly. Both have their advantages, and that's probably a mouthful to even wrap your head around right there.
Yeah.
So basically what we want to do is we want to add a new response code here of 400. It's like bad data or something. I don't know. It's anything but 200, right? So so as long as this method will expect a 400 back, we can tell the response what to look for is how it works. So as long as Lambda returns anything, what the default is, we'll respond with 200 OK. So what we can do is add an integration response. And what it does is this is where that stringify part comes in.
Yep.
And you can see in my drop down how many things I've been trying to play with right here. So what you have to do is you have to use regex, and you have to trap what comes back from Lambda in the regex and decide if that should be a 400 code or not. I think it's actually a little overcomplicated, but that's just the way it works. So I think if I'm looking for, what did my response say? My response said error message status 400. So if I look for this string right here, status 400, in the Lambda response, which is that guy right there, I can say throw a 400. Let's see if that's going to work. It would be a miracle if that works right off the bat. Because it took me like a good couple hours to get that working in the first place. It was rough.
That sounds rough.
Yeah, a little overly complicated. Remember, just real quick here before I test that. No, actually, let's not get distracted. Let's test. Let me see if I get a 400. Nope, give it to 30 seconds. Come on. No, I don't think it's going to do it. So anyways, when you're back here on your resources and you're under get, and then you do your integration request, and I talked about this proxy integration right here, that's where if I check that, I'll set up a new one. But if I check that, it will allow you to bypass API Gateway and then have all your responses come from Lambda instead.
Yeah.
Which that might be easier because then I can send a response code 400 directly from Lambda, but it's not as scalable. So then I have to know in Lambda what integration endpoints are hitting my Lambda function to be able to return the right codes. But if I trap it at the API layer gateway, I can send the specific error codes to the users who are expecting it, and Lambda doesn't care. Lambda's just like, yes, I found a file, or no, I didn't, so I'm just going to throw an error, if that makes sense.
Does make sense.
Cool. Let me try one other thing here to try to get that working. Or let's just see if it caught up. No luck.
How long did it take you to learn all of this stuff, in case people are just getting their feet wet here?
What's that? Sorry.
How long do you think it takes? At least, I mean, you got into it when it was kind of in the wild west days, right?
Right.
What do you think the learning curve is for new users of Lambda and API Gateway if they wanted to get started?
It's a little bit steep, I will admit, and I think it's because I'm doing the full. It's because I'm doing the full integration
Yeah.
request. If you go down the route of these APIs, and then if I create the new API and I use this the Lambda HTTP API,
Yep.
so out of the box, what it does is it creates your cores, your integrations, and all that kind of stuff without some of the extra steps that we had to take
Yeah.
with building templates and whatnot. So that'll ease the learning curve a little bit too, and just setting up the basic API endpoints in Lambda. Or I mean, in API Gateway isn't all that too terrible. To just do post, get, and put, those are probably like the easiest ways to start. It's when you get into modifying the requests, that's when it actually gets complicated. And then throw WebSockets in on top of that. That's even going to be harder. So
Save that for another day.
definitely it's a learning curve, but so super powerful. Like the service integration and all that other kind of stuff. It's really a powerful thing. You could just control everything through API Gateway and no need for Lambda at all anymore. A couple of our services do that. Just connect directly to S3 using an API key. That's a pretty powerful feature.
Yeah. Anything else you want to show before we get into maybe part two another time?
Yeah, I think we should do. How about Q&A session if anyone has anything? That was kind of it. The API key, and then hopefully getting the response codes working didn't work out. I promised Crutch Corn, I think it was who asked the question, or there was the reply. I will get those working on my actual APIs if I ever distribute them. But besides that, yeah, that's just really the front to back was connect to Lambda, pull an S3 object, throw an API key on it, and it's pretty successful, I think, so far.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, coming from somebody like me who has only brushed upon the surface maybe a few times a year,
Yeah,
it does open the door on what you can actually do, what I've missed out on, and what I've had to do the hard way.
yeah. What would be the hard way? What would be harder than this? I guess writing it all in code on Lambda side. I
Yeah, writing
guess.
it all in code. I didn't. There was a few settings I forgot what they were in the setup that you brushed over, and it was a lot easier the way that
Gotcha.
you did it.
Yeah, and it just really comes down to the like I call it like a separation of concerns with Lambda, right? Like I don't want to figure out what response codes to send from Lambda or any of the other stuff, the API gateway, all the security and all the API tokens and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to worry about that in my code. I want to just say, hey Lambda, go get me the S3 object. Hey Lambda, just do exactly this one thing, and then it just makes my JavaScript a lot cleaner. Believe it or not, that code that I had over there earlier is about as simple as you can get to connect to S3
Yeah.
because I don't have to deal with any of the API gateway stuff.
Well, sweet. Yeah. So then we'll do this again. And I definitely want to do this WebSocket stuff. So I'm gonna hold you onto that.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So we'll come up with something on
Challenge
WebSockets.
accepted. I will. I will get something going for that one definitely.
So I added a
And
few
then we
things in
got
the chat though. So for
sure.
example, I did throw up your Twitter information. So Moto Breath on Twitter. Please give Chris a follow. Also,
Yep.
I put up his blog, which is I think it's technically blog.chrismitchellonline.com, but I threw up chrismitchellonline.com. I think they might even go to
Yeah.
the same place.
Yep.
But yeah, you've got a lot of DevOps oriented tutorials on there. I also put that this video will be available on demand on YouTube. Probably not today, but maybe tomorrow or the day after. I'll get it transferred over there. It's kind of a process for an hour-long video. It's like 4 GB. My internet's being throttled right now. It's a big mess. As far as other logistics information, again, still getting used to the Twitch streaming stuff, so the quality will improve every time we do a stream. Oh, you got the Skype information up. You might want to close that. Tomorrow, so tomorrow we actually have a stream. So tomorrow being Sunday, not Sunday, I don't even know what day of the week it is anymore. Tuesday, the 31st of March. We actually have Ray Camden coming on the stream to talk about Eleventy, which is a static site generator. So assuming that my schedule doesn't blow up again like it has the past few days, this should be an interesting stream as well. Anything else you want to add, Chris?
No, thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks Nick for putting this on. I really appreciate the invite and pushing me to do this. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.